how you doing, Nora?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. My first question, I just want to start off. I know that you came to this project a little later, and that Saoirse Ronan being attached was a huge selling point to you. So what about her as an actor makes you really excited as a director that made you want to sign on?
Well, if you have a project like this where half the film takes place on a tiny remote island with a woman by herself, not speaking with anyone, you're really like, oh, this could be boring. But then if you know, wait a minute, Saoirse Ronan is playing the part, suddenly it gets very exciting because she is so, I mean, diverse in how how you can watch her. She has so many shades and nuances and can transport so much with just her face that it actually is quite amazing because there are very few actors in the world, I would say, who have this presence where you go like, she could brush her teeth and it would be interesting. I kind of would want to watch it, there would be an elegance to it or something larger than life. And yeah, thanks to this and many other things, I no need to say that she's very talented and committed and easy to work with. But I mean, that was for me the thing where I thought, okay, yeah, we're safe, you know, we got
Yeah.
searched.
And did you actually shoot on the remote island?
Oh yeah.
Oh
Oh
wow.
yeah. So we shot on the remote islands. I think all the locations that you see in the film, almost all of them are, at least the ones in Orkney, are the real locations from Amy's life. It's the
Wow.
farm where she grew up in. It's the house, her childhood memories, that is the house where she lived in as a kid. The caravan of her father is his real caravan. And when she spends the winter by herself in Rose Cottage, that is the actual Rose Cottage where she wrote the book, The Outrun,
Oh wow, that's
10
incredible.
years ago. Yeah.
I love when films take especially narrative films take archival footage and photos and they kind of weave it all together into this something that's greater than itself. And that happens in the Outrun. So what made you want to blend the archival footage and these photographs? And then what was the process of finding all of these things to add to the film?
So the book itself, it all starts with Amy's book basically, and with Amy's character. So you could think, okay, yeah, it's the story about, addiction and recovery, but then the book always drifts away because she, as a person, is so interested in what happens around her that, sometimes she spends half a page writing about the physiological process of a wave breaking. And you're like, wow, you're such a nerd, but it's so interesting, all these scientific facts and the mythology about the island. And then also, she spent 2 winters by herself in this house in complete isolation on a tiny island on the edge of Europe. And then she starts chatting with astronauts. I mean, who would do that? So I thought that's such a fantastic image for seeking connection, but not knowing how so I wanted to preserve that in the film, and that's why we created what we call the nerd layer. We have the London layer that's in the past, we have the Orkney layer, which is the present tense, and then there is the nerd layer. And I think the biggest challenge was to make sure that the nerd layer doesn't just include the stuff that we all find interesting and fascinating, but we had to cut quite a bit and always make sure it is in relation with where is the character in this very moment, and how does it reflect on her journey throughout the movie. And so a lot of fantastic stuff we had to cut, but thankfully the best bits stayed in. And because you were asking about the mix of archive and photography and all that, I thought, Amy's brain or her worldview is so interesting and so broad, broad and limitless, that we needed to make sure that also the audiovisual use of this nerd layer always feels surprising and free and different. And it's not like, oh, you see one and then you're like, now I understand how it works. But each element can be whatever it wants. So yeah, it was about finding creative freedom there.
Well, one of the things that you added in is this gorgeous animation sequence about the myths of the Orkney Islands and how they were created. So where did that start? I haven't read the book, unfortunately, but I've heard that there are a lot of pictures involved. Did that animation style come from the book itself?
Not from the book. The story
Hmm.
is the real story about the origin of the Orkney Islands, and she mentions it in the book. And I find it quite amazing that this tremor sound is explained by the burning liver,
Mhm.
because as an alcoholic, you destroy your liver, right? So it has this weird connection um, with her story. And then, yeah, we got together with an animation studio and we brainstormed about how do we want this to look, because it is also a childhood story, but it needs to be sort of, have a sort of a dark feel to it and be very archaic in a
Mhm.
way. It's a story that's been told for thousands of years.
Yeah. So you talk about the layers, the London layer and then the Orkney layer. One of the ways that like it's very easy to kind of pick out where you are in time is the hair color of Rona. But it's very interesting because when she's at her height of alcoholism and going through all these really heavy things, her hair is blue, which is usually kind of like the relief color. Whereas when she finds that relief toward the end of the film, her hair is red. And so I was curious if that was a choice that came from Amy or if that was a choice that came when you, because I know that you wanted to separate Amy from Rona as like a different character.
Yeah. So that was the first bit that we did. I think when I came on board, the very first thing I said is, "Hey, we have to change the name
Mhm.
for Saoirse's mental health, for Amy's mental health, and for mine as well, because we need to be able to make a clear creative separation of this is the real Amy. Saoirse doesn't need to imitate the real Amy. We're creating a fictional character here that consists of the three of us, but is true to Amy's story, you
Mhm.
know? So that's how we started. But the element of the changing hair color comes from the book and from Amy herself. So she used to have all kinds of hair colors, and this sort of weird turquoise, she called it mermaid punk. And in the book, she writes about a sequence when she was very bad in London. She wasn't feeling good. It was, tough times, and she had dyed her eyebrows in red, and then, had this allergic reaction, and went to the club with these eyebrows. And so I found that so inspiring to, take this as a character tool and say she is somebody who expresses through hair colors, through fashion, but use it for the story.
Mhm.
And so, we don't cover all the hair colors that Amy had in her life. We reduced it to say, okay, blue kind of stands for Orkney. It's the bit of Orkney when she's in London. And London always has those other color palette, the contrast, like it's red and orange and pink. And so in the end, when she's well again and she sort of makes peace with the two worlds and all those extreme forces within her, she kind of, gets her London wildness back, but in a healthy and sober way.
Yeah, I love that. And that kind of brings me to a question that I had. A lot of, I feel like films in that are like dramatic films kind of focus on I don't want to say the drama, but the everything of the alcoholism, like the heightened fights and the just the drama of all of that. And your film is very focused on recovery. Was it ever, and I feel like that is still rare to get to see like the work that goes into changing. Was that difficult to get picked up and to get interest in?
Ooh, probably that's a production question in terms of,
Yeah.
how the whole process of financing was. When I came, the BBC was already attached and people were very supportive and Saoirse was there. So things moved quite quickly.
Mm.
Um, of course, independent film financing is always a crazy process.
Yeah.
And of course, people are like, oh, stories about alcoholism. We've seen that. And yes, we've seen that. But exactly like you say, I thought for me, this isn't a story about alcoholism. It's a story about healing and recovery. It's about connection to a place, to community. It is about the inheritance of mental illness and how our family history shapes us, and how is it possible to break out of these circles as human beings and evolve. And so there was so much hope and strength and beauty in this story for me that, yes, it's graphic and brutal at parts.
Hmm.
That's also the quality of the book, this brutal honesty about how bad things got. But it's amazing she got herself out of that, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And my last question for you is kind of going back to like the nerd layer that we were talking about. Science, it rarely gets to be seen as like this beautiful poetic thing, but I would argue that your film is kind of science at its most beautiful and poetic with these beautiful voiceovers and just talking about, like you said, like waves, and it's just like you could listen to it all day. So how did you find that balance between romanticizing the minutia of science and then the like actually science? You know what I'm trying. Sorry, I kind of stumbled on
Yeah.
the question.
I think it was a lot of trial and error in the editing process, to always like keep it nerdy, but not too nerdy, because it always should have the connection to Rona and her character. And it's almost like Amy uses it in a philosophical way,
Hmm.
because it's all, the same thing, like her mom's extreme religiousness, her dad's manic depression, her alcoholism, and then she switches her extreme use of alcohol and clubbing into like emerging herself into the world of seaweed. So she finds another substitute that she gets high on with this which is scientific knowledge, And there is something very fascinating about nature and about how little in the end we as human beings know and understand about the world we live in, life and death and all those mysteries. And we think we understand a lot and can control it because it gives us comfort, but let's face it, we don't. And it's yeah, it's very I find science quite philosophical, I guess, in the end.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Nora, for your time. It's a beautiful film. I really loved it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.